Our nation this last week has been rocked by the sight of mob violence committed by right-wing white supremacists, terrorists, really, in the full meaning of that word. What has also been shocking, I think, to many of us, although in some ways the signs have always been there, is the fact that many of them carried signs talking about God, talking about Jesus Christ being on their side, that they were an army of God. They represent a heretical schism of Christianity called Christian nationalism, or more correctly, white Christian nationalism. Some of their beliefs include the idea that they are being called by God to fight an end times war, essentially a race war, to purify America of everyone who is not white and the form of Christian that they believe they are. Perhaps in another sermon, I will sort of lay out some of the beliefs of this group because they're very dangerous. They pose a great threat to our democracy, and in fact, an even greater threat to our faith. So I want, in the next several weeks, in this sermon series, to very clearly lay out what the religious spirituality of Jesus is all about, what it truly is about. Because we need to understand who we are. And we need to understand who it is that we follow. And we need to understand the specific life it calls us to. So today, I want to talk about holistic religion, about what it means for the path of Jesus to involve our whole being, our whole selves. And to do that, I want to go back in history, go back to an early part of the Bible, the book of Deuteronomy, where we find a practice, a declaration, you might call it a mantra, that the Jewish people for centuries have recited to embed themselves in the presence of God. It's one of the central practices, and it's a practice from ancient days. And what it is it involves the recitation of what is called the Shema. Now it's called that because the first word in Hebrew is Shema, which means to hear. But it's a command. It means more precisely, listen to this with the fullness of your being and a complete intention of obeying. In Hebrew it goes, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. So let's talk about its setting for a moment in Deuteronomy. The ancient Israelites, as they moved from their captivity in Egypt to a consummation of their journey in the land of promise, they were on a spiritual journey as well, a journey of identity. It's a journey well worth studying because it provides an archetype for our own journey to God, our own journey on the path of Jesus. And one of the biggest obstacles they faced in leaving Egypt was leaving Egypt behind. They had to get Egypt and everything Egypt meant and had imprinted upon their hearts and minds out of their systems. You could say they had gotten out of Egypt, and now what they had to do was get Egypt out of them. And this had to occur on all levels. So Moses begins to teach them the way of the Lord God to replace the way of Egypt. And this way was manifested by directing the focus of their affections and intentions, their devotion, and their purpose toward the Lord. It involved loving God with all their heart, mind, soul, and strength. What he was teaching them was, in essence, what we can call a holistic religion. Now, last week, we spoke about religion as having to do with rebinding what has come unbound, frayed, torn, brokenness and the unweaving of things. We have a name for this: sin. But what is sin? Well, it literally means missing the mark. The terms in Hebrew and in Greek both mean missing the mark. They're both terms that are adopted from archery. Let's just take a look at this for a moment. Missing the mark. Archery is really a martial art that requires a careful, disciplined training of eye, mind, body, attitude, and intention. There's a famous story in the literature of India of a family of brothers who were great warriors, who went to be taught the art of archery and swordplay from the greatest master of these arts in the world. Now, the target was a small model of a bird set on top of a stick. They all lined up one by one and drew their arrows in the bows. And as they aimed to shoot at the target, the teacher would ask them, "What do you see?" One brother would say, "I see the sky and the clouds, the bird and the stick, the ground underneath." "Sit down," the master would command. The next would say, "I see the bird and the feathers, how far up from the ground it is." "Sit down." And so on, with each brother describing everything they saw. Finally, Arjuna came up and drew his bow. The teacher asked him, "What do you see?" "I see only the eye of the bird." "Shoot," the master commanded. And the arrow flew straight and true and pierced the eye of the target. What the master knew and taught was that it was impossible to hit the target if the archer was not integrated in body, mind, and heart. If the mind was busy thinking about things, many things, worrying about what had happened earlier that day, concerned with impressing the teacher, or if the heart was divided with concerns about having the most status, or trying to have this or that recognition, or if the body were weak or poisoned by the pleasures of a sensual life, the arrow would not fly true and would miss the mark. Well, this is how sin operates. Sin is the word we use to describe a syndrome common to all humans, missing and falling short of the person that God knows we can be, and actually calls us to be, or calls us to become, is the better way to put it. Because our life, our journey in life, is a journey of becoming. And that's what the journey on the path of Jesus is all about, growth into the fullness of humanity. Paul describes this as coming, quote, to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to maturity, to the full measure of the full stature of Christ. That's in Ephesians 4:13. However, there are obstacles to this attainment that plague us on this journey, and they affect us at different parts of our being. And so we can refer to these parts using language such as heart, mind, soul, strength. You know, part of what is unraveled in life is our own integrity as humans. Not only moral integrity, which is, of course, one of the great issues of our time, but also our wholeness as persons. We need to be rewoven ourselves. We need to be made whole again. And so the religion of Jesus is designed to restore us to wholeness. Wholeness as persons, but also wholeness as a community of people. And one way that it does this is by being holistic. Holistic. So holistic refers to the wholeness of a thing, or a thing in its completeness, its put-togetherness. Holistic religion addresses the human person in their wholeness. Holistic religion and spirituality will address such things as the human thirst for knowledge and understanding, as well as those deeply felt commitments that we have, and that sense of our connectedness to ultimate concerns and purposes in the world. It will also provide embodied practices that work at the physical level of the body and even the physical level of the brain. You know, contemporary research in neurophysiology demonstrates that the neurological circuits in the brain can be altered by changes in behavior. So the spiritual disciplines that we talk about and we'll be looking at later during the season of Lent work precisely because they alter the brain's neurological connections. So a holistic religion will also address our embeddedness in social networks and communities. You know, we're formed as human beings by virtue of our interactions with other humans. And so spiritual transformation best occurs in the context of spiritually engaged religious communities. And I'll discuss this in greater depth in a later sermon. But it's noted here because it's an integral part of a holistic religion and spirituality. So the Shema expresses well the holistic and integral nature of this religious spiritual journey that we're looking at in the sermon series. And in Mark, the gospel, the verse reads, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength." So these four aspects describe a spirituality that encompasses the fullness of human life and being. So let's look at each very briefly here. Heart. Now the heart in the Bible, in the way of thinking of the Hebrew people and in subsequent cultures, denotes that central, or better yet, centered place within human life that directs our actions according to that which we hold to be of ultimate concern, commitment. And in Hebrew, the word translated heart is labab. And there's an old rabbinical tradition that begins with a student's question. It says, now, why is it that the bait, the B sound, is doubled in labub? The rabbi responds, to remind us that in every human heart, good and evil dwell side by side. It is our choice which of the two shall be manifested in the world. So the heart is viewed as being the center of moral choice. So morality, of course, is concerned with how our values and commitments in life shape our actions. And if we think of the idea that Christ is reweaving and rebinding our lives in the world through how we live our lives in the world, then morality is like the pattern of the reweaving. We reweave the world through how we live our lives in the world and act upon that world. Just like our fleshly hearts beat out a patterned rhythmic beat, so the moral hearts march to the beat of a pattern of behavior. Next word is soul. The Greek word for this is psyche, which can also refer to one's being. Now, soul is very much connected to who we are individually. It expresses that point of our being that serves to unify our experiences, our decisions, our learnings, things we've learned, as well as our uniqueness. It's not the same thing as our personality, but it's the connective cord that ties together the various personal facets that constitute us as human beings. So in Greek, it's called psyche, and in Latin, it's called anima. In Hebrew, it is called nephesh. And each refers to the principle that gives life to living beings. We often talk about how a singer really has soul. Well, that usually refers to how fully they inhabit the song they sing. Soul is how we inhabit our lives. It's how the life force moves through us and then out into the world. So that's soul. Mind, the next word, the next part. Trying to precisely define mind has proven to be a source of great vexation in modern discussions of the brain, mind, and body. But it basically involves our processes of thinking logically, of making decisions, of reflecting upon our experiences, responding to sensory input, communicating, imagining, creating, and so on. So perhaps it is most helpful to consider mind as that function that moves towards purposeful action based upon our circumstances and what we determine to be in keeping with our deepest values and commitments. So that's mind. And strength. Strength refers to the process of embodying and enacting our decisions and commitments. It's not enough simply to have an idea in mind or to espouse some sort of ideal. We have to put it on the ground, as it were. It has to go from heart to mind to feet. And that's how we act holistically. And religion teaches us and patterns our lives holistically. Well, the world and our lives need to be rewoven. And it's the purpose of religious spirituality, particularly the religious spirituality of Jesus, to reweave and to rebind the torn places. And it does this with a four-stranded thread: heart, soul, mind, and strength. And we have to use this thread completely and fully. All our heart, all our soul, all our mind, and all our strength. No halfway measures. The journey on the path of Jesus requires each of us to give it our all. We don't have to be super athletes. We can do it at any stage in life. It just means to be fully present and to say to God, here I am. I'm ready for duty. All of it.